The alarm screamed through the bridge of the steady horizon, cutting through the quiet hum of deep space travel. Commander Taijun looked up from his reports, his dark eyes narrowing at the flashing red lights across the control panel. "What is it?" he called out, already moving toward the main display. Bora, the navigator, had her hands flying across her console. Her face was tight with concentration. "Distress signal, Commander." "Weak, but definitely there. Coming from Sector 7-9. Taijun felt his stomach tighten. Sector 7-9 was neutral space, the empty zone between human territory and the Varanthi Empire. Nobody went there unless they had to, and nobody expected help if they got into trouble there. "Can you identify the ship?" he asked. Bora shook her head. "The signal is breaking up, but the signature looks alien, not human." From the engineering station, Hyunwoo spoke up. His voice carried a warning tone. "Commander, we're 3 days from the nearest station. Our supplies are already tight after that delay at the mining outpost. If we divert now, we'll be cutting it close." Taejun knew Hyunwoo was right. The Steady Horizon was a cargo vessel, not a rescue ship. They were carrying medical supplies to the outer colonies, and those people were counting on them. Every hour mattered, but so did the life sending that distress signal. "Change course," Taejun said quietly. "Take us to those coordinates." Boran nodded immediately and began adjusting their heading. Hyunwoo opened his mouth as if to protest, then closed it. He had served with Taejun for 5 years. He knew that look. "I'll prep the medical bay," came a voice from the doorway. Ji-won, their medical officer, stood there with her arms crossed. She was small but fierce, and right now her expression said she had heard everything. "Just in case." "Thank you," Taejun said. The Steady Horizon changed course, its engines pushing them toward the distress signal. As they got closer, their sensors began picking up more details. What they found made everyone on the bridge go silent. "It's a Varanthi ship," Bora whispered. "A scout-class vessel. Commander, it's torn apart. Hull breaches on 3 decks. Life support is failing." Taejun felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The Varanthi. Of all the species in the galaxy, the Varanthi were perhaps the most proud. They had looked down on humanity since the day humans built their first warp drive. To the Varanthi, humans were children playing with technology they did not understand. Primitives, upstarts, barely worth noticing, and the Varanthi made sure humans knew it. Every meeting between their species was filled with cold formality and barely hidden contempt. Varanthi officials had blocked human expansion into 3 different sectors. They had voted against human membership in the Galactic Trade Council twice. They had never, not once, offered assistance to any human ship in distress. "Commander?" Bora's voice was uncertain. She was waiting for orders, but her eyes asked the question everyone was thinking. "Why should we help them?" Taejun looked at the broken ship on the screen. Somewhere inside that wreckage were living beings who were dying. Maybe they hated humans. Maybe they would spit on his boots if they survived. But they were still dying and he could help. "Bring us alongside," he said firmly. "Prepare boarding equipment. Hyunwoo, I need you with me. G1, get ready to receive casualties." "Commander, are you sure about this?" Hyunwoo asked. "They wouldn't do the same for us." Taijun turned to look at his engineer. "I know," he said softly, "but we're not them." 20 minutes later, Taejun and Hyunwoo floated through the shattered corridor of the Varanthi ship. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting strange shadows across walls that had been beautiful once. The Varanthi built their ships like works of art, all flowing curves and elegant design. Now those curves were torn and bleeding atmosphere into space. "Life signs ahead," Hyunwoo reported, checking his scanner. 3 of them. All weak. They found the first Varanthi pinned beneath a collapsed bulkhead. He was already dead, his purple blood frozen in the cold air. The second was in the medical bay, also gone. But in the command center they found someone alive. The Varanthi was young, maybe the equivalent of 20 in human years. His skin was the deep blue of his species, marked with the silver patterns that indicated he was from a military family. He was barely breathing, his chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. One of his forearms was twisted at a horrible angle. Blood pooled beneath him. "Still alive," Taejun said, kneeling beside him. "Hyunwoo, help me get him stabilized for transport." The Varanthi's eyes flickered open. They were gold, bright even in the dim light. They focused on Taejun's face, on his obviously human features. The alien's expression twisted into something between confusion and disgust. "Human," he rasped in heavily accented standard. "Leave me." Not happening, Taejun replied, already applying a pressure bandage to the worst of the wounds. We're getting you out of here. I said leave. The Varanthi tried to push him away with his good arm, but he was too weak. Do not touch me with your primitive hands. Taejun ignored him and kept working. Hyunwoo joined him, and together they got the Varanthi onto a transport stretcher. They found 2 more survivors in the engineering section, both unconscious. It took 3 trips to get everyone back to the steady horizon. Jiwon worked through the night using supplies that were meant for the colonies. She used medicines that cost more than most crew members earned in a month. She pushed her equipment to its limits and beyond. Hyunwoo modified their environmental systems to provide the specific atmosphere mixture the Varanthi needed. Bora diverted power from non-essential systems to keep the medical bay running at full capacity. The young Varanthi, whose name they learned was Velthar, regained consciousness after 6 hours. The first thing he did was demand to know why they had saved him. Taejun stood beside his medical bed, arms crossed. Because you were dying. We are enemies, Velthar said. His voice was stronger now, but still weak. My people despise yours. I know, Taejun said. We have never helped you. We never would. I know that too. Velthar stared at him, those gold eyes searching for something. Then why? Taejun was quiet for a moment. He thought about all the reasons he could give. About human philosophy and ethics. About the regulations that technically required ships to respond to distress calls. About politics and public relations. But in the end, he gave the simple truth. Because no one deserves to die alone in the dark, he said. Not even someone who hates me. Velthar had no response to that. He turned his face away. 3 days later, the steady horizon arrived at the nearest Varanthi outpost. Taejun had sent ahead their passenger information, and a military ship was waiting for them. Varanthi soldiers boarded with weapons ready, as if expecting a trap. They took their wounded without a word of thanks. Velthar was the last to leave. He paused at the airlock, turning back to look at Taejun. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. I do not understand you, Velthar finally said. Taejun smiled, but it was sad. Maybe someday you will. The Varanthi left. The soldiers departed. The military ship pulled away without even a standard farewell transmission. On the bridge of the steady horizon, Bora let out a long breath. Well, that's that. We wasted 3 days and half our supplies for nothing. Taejun watched the Varanthi ship disappear into the stars. Maybe, he said. Or maybe not. He turned away from the view screen and headed for his quarters. Behind him, he did not see Velthar standing at a window on the Varanthi ship, watching the human vessel grow smaller and smaller. The young Varanthi pressed one hand against the glass, his expression troubled. Something had changed. He did not know what yet, but he knew he would never forget the human who saved him for no reason at all, and that changed everything. 6 months passed, and Velthar could not forget. He had returned to the Varanthi homeworld, to the gleaming crystal towers of the capital city. He had made his reports to his superiors. He had undergone medical treatment in the finest facilities his species could offer. He had been given commendations for surviving, against impossible odds, but nobody wanted to hear about the humans who saved him. It was a statistical anomaly, his commander Rathsal told him during one meeting. The older Varanthi sat behind a desk carved from a single piece of star metal, his 4 arms folded in dismissal. Humans are unpredictable creatures. They act on emotion rather than logic. What they did means nothing. They gave their medical supplies, Velthar insisted. Supplies they needed for their own mission. They risked their ship for us. Rathazal made a gesture of contempt. Then they are fools. Weakness dressed as virtue. This is why they will never be a major power in the galaxy. They lack the strength to make hard choices. Velthar wanted to argue, but he held his tongue. In Varanthi culture, challenging a superior too directly was a serious offense. So instead he stayed silent. But inside, questions burned. He began to research humanity in his private time. The Varanthi databases had plenty of information, though most of it was dismissive. Humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, having achieved warp travel only 70 years ago. They were weak compared to the major powers. Their technology was adequate but not impressive. Their military was small. Their territory was limited. But as Velthar dug deeper, he found other stories. Stories buried in routine reports and incident logs. Stories that the Varanthi leadership never discussed. 15 years ago, a human medical team had responded to the Krell plague outbreak on 3 Varanthi colony worlds. They had brought medicine and asked for nothing in return. The official reports barely mentioned it. 8 years ago, human rescue ships had pulled 200 Varanthi civilians from a station that was falling into a dying star. The humans had lost one of their own ships in the rescue. The Varanthi government sent a formal acknowledgement but no gratitude. 4 years ago, a human agricultural ship had given 6 months of food supplies to a Varanthi military vessel stranded by engine failure. The military vessel's captain had written in his log that the humans displayed unusual charity for such a primitive species. The pattern was there, once Velthar started looking for it. Humanity helped. Again and again they helped. And not just the Varanthi, but everyone. He found records of human ships defending Dre trading convoys from pirates, even though the Dre had voted against human trade rights. He found documentation of human scientists sharing research freely with the Nishal, even when they could have kept it secret and gained advantage. He found reports of human colonies taking in refugees from half a dozen species after their worlds were destroyed by war or natural disaster. And in every case, humanity asked for nothing. No payment. No political favors. No treaties. They just helped and moved on. Velthar sat in his quarters late one night staring at screens full of data. His people called humans primitive, weak, foolish, but the evidence showed something else. It showed a species that acted with consistent compassion across decades, even when that compassion was not returned. He thought about Commander Tai-Jun, standing beside his medical bed. No one deserves to die alone in the dark. What kind of species believed that? What kind of species lived it? Across the galaxy, others were asking similar questions. Colvin was a Dre merchant who operated a small trading fleet. The Dre were insect-like beings, covered in chitinous armor, with compound eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not imagine. They were practical creatures who dealt in credits and contracts. 3 years ago, Colvin's convoy had been attacked by pirates in the outer reaches. His ships were outgunned and outmaneuvered. He was certain he would die. Then a human patrol ship arrived. Just one ship against 5 pirate vessels. The humans fought anyway. They destroyed 2 pirate ships and crippled a 3rd. But they lost their own ship in the process. Colvin watched the human vessel break apart, atmosphere venting into space. He had screamed for them to run to save themselves, but they stayed until the convoy was safe. The human crew escaped in life pods. Colvin picked them up himself. The human captain, a woman named Minji, was bleeding from a head wound. When Colvin asked why they had sacrificed their ship, she looked confused by the question. "You needed help," she said simply. Colvin had tried to pay them. He offered credits, cargo space, anything. Minji refused it all. "Just get your people home safe," she said. That's payment enough. Now 3 years later, Colvin still thought about that day. He talked about it in trading posts and merchant gatherings. Other traders had similar stories. Humans who helped them navigate dangerous routes. Humans who warned them about corrupt officials. Humans who gave fair prices when they could have demanded more. "They are strange," another merchant once said to Colvin. "But I trust a human's word more than I trust most contracts." In the research stations orbiting the academic world of Nishal Prime, a scientist named Ela was having similar thoughts. The Nishal were amphibious beings, brilliant researchers who had given the galaxy some of its greatest scientific advances. They were also fiercely competitive, and academic credit meant everything in their culture. Ela had worked with human scientists on a joint project studying dark matter fluctuations. The work was groundbreaking. It could have won awards, secured funding for decades. The humans could have published first and claimed all the glory. Instead, they insisted on making it a joint publication. They gave Ela's team equal credit, even for work the humans had done largely alone. When Ela asked why, the human lead researcher, a man named Jae-sung, had shrugged. "You contributed to the project," he said. "Science isn't about glory. It's about truth. We found truth together." Ela had been stunned. In Nishal culture, such an action was almost unthinkable. You took credit for your work. You built your reputation. You competed. But the humans seemed to genuinely not care about competition. They cared about the work itself. She began asking other Nishal scientists about their experiences with humans. The stories were similar. Humans who shared data freely. Humans who helped with experiments without demanding authorship. humans who celebrated other species' discoveries as enthusiastically as their own. They are either the most foolish species in the galaxy, one of her colleagues said, or the most wise. On the refugee world of New Sanctuary, a young Quellan named Pyrrha was growing up in a human household. The Quellan were peaceful beings, tall and graceful, with skin that changed color with their emotions. Pyrrha's world had been destroyed in a war between two larger powers. She had been 5 years old when the ships came, firing on anything that moved. Her parents died in the first bombardment. She escaped on a refugee transport that barely made it out of the system. The ship was packed with survivors, all traumatized, all lost. They floated through space for weeks, running low on supplies, not knowing where to go. Most species turned them away. Refugee crises were complicated, expensive, political. Nobody wanted the burden except humans. A human colony ship found them and brought them to New Sanctuary, a world humans were terraforming. The human governor, a kind woman named Haywan, welcomed them with open arms. She gave them land, supplies, and tools to build new lives. "This world is big enough for all of us," Haywan said. A human family named the Kims adopted Pyrrha. They had 2 children of their own, but they treated Pyrrha no differently. They learned about Quellan culture. They helped her remember her birth parents. They let her grieve and heal at her own pace. Now 10 years later, Pyrrha was 15. She attended human schools and had human friends, but she also connected with the growing Quellan community on New Sanctuary. She was building a life that honored both her heritage and her new family. Sometimes she heard people from other species talk about humans. Primitive, they said. Weak, not important. Pyrrha thought about her adoptive father, Dong Hyun, teaching her to ride a bicycle. About her adoptive mother, Soo Jin, sitting with her through nightmares. About her adoptive siblings treating her like she had always been part of their family. These humans had given her everything and asked for nothing. How is that weakness? These stories spread through the galaxy like ripples in water. They moved through trade routes and communication networks. They were shared in refugee camps and research stations. They were told in merchant guilds and military barracks. The major powers tried to ignore them. These were just anecdotes, they said. Isolated incidents, not representative of anything meaningful, but ordinary people were listening, and they were starting to wonder. Back on the Varanthi homeworld, Velthar made a decision. He could not change his government's views on humanity. He could not make his people acknowledge what humans had done, but he could remember. He began keeping a personal record of every human action he could find, every rescue, every act of generosity, every moment of compassion. He documented it all, adding his own story to the growing collection. He did not know if anyone would ever read it. He did not know if it would matter, but he remembered Commander Taejun's words. No one deserves to die alone in the dark. Maybe, Velthar thought, no one deserves to be forgotten either. The warning came at dawn on Earth, when most of humanity was still sleeping. Admiral Sang-woo was in his office at Fleet Command, reviewing supply reports when the emergency channel activated. The voice on the other end was tight with fear. "Admiral, we have a situation. The Malachor swarm has entered neutral space. Multiple hive ships. They're heading for the outer colonies." Sang-woo felt his blood turn cold. The Malachor swarm was one of the galaxy's nightmare stories. They were a hive mind species that consumed everything in their path. Whole civilizations had fallen to them. They did not negotiate. They did not retreat. They simply came and destroyed. "How many ships?" he asked, already pulling up tactical displays. "At least 40 hive ships, sir. Possibly more. The colonies are requesting immediate evacuation assistance. 40 ships." Sang-woo looked at the numbers on his screen. The human fleet could maybe muster 20 combat vessels if they pulled everything from border patrol. Against a swarm force that size, they would be slaughtered. "Wake everyone up," he said quietly. "Full mobilization. I want every available ship ready to move in 6 hours. Sir, the Galactic Council is meeting to discuss response options. Perhaps we should wait for—" "We don't have time to wait," Sang-woo interrupted. "Those colonies have maybe 3 days before the swarm reaches them. By the time the Council finishes talking, millions will be dead. Get our ships ready." He cut the connection and stood looking out the window at the Earth below, his homeworld so beautiful and blue. He thought about all the people down there who would never know what was about to happen. Who would wake up, go to work, laugh with their families, completely unaware that their military was about to commit suicide in space. because that was what this would be. Suicide. Humanity was still a minor power. They had good ships, well-trained crews, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Against the Malachor swarm, they had no chance. But those colonies needed help, and if humanity did not go, no one would. Sang-Woo took a deep breath and began making calls. Across the galaxy, the major powers were indeed meeting. The Varanthi Empire, the Nexian Collective, the Thoros Assembly, and a dozen smaller governments connected to the emergency council session. Representatives appeared as holograms in a virtual chamber, all of them speaking at once. "We must consider the strategic implications," the Varanthi ambassador argued. His 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of stress. "The outer colonies are not part of any major power. They exist in neutral space by choice. We have no formal obligation to defend them. But millions of civilians will die," the Nishal representative protested. She was a small amphibious being who looked fragile but spoke with steel in her voice. "We cannot simply abandon them, can we not?" The Thoros delegate was a massive creature of stone and crystal, his voice rumbling like an avalanche. "My people have no interest in starting a war with the swarm. The colonies chose to live outside our protection. That was their decision." The debate continued. Hours passed. They discussed logistics and treaties. They debated jurisdiction and precedent. They formed subcommittees to study the situation, and while they talked, the swarm kept moving. On the human flagship Indomitable Spirit, Captain Yun-Hai walked through the corridors, looking at her crew. They were young, most of them, barely into their 20s. They had joined the fleet expecting to patrol borders and maybe chase pirates. Now they were going to face the swarm. She found her engineering chief, Dae-Hyun, in the reactor room. He was working on power distribution, trying to squeeze every bit of performance from their systems. "How is it looking?" she asked. Dae-Hyun wiped sweat from his forehead. He was a big man, strong enough to haul reactor components by himself, but right now he looked tired. "We can give you maybe 10% more firepower than normal. But Captain, it won't be enough. Even if we were at 200%, it wouldn't be enough." "I know," Yun-Hee said quietly. "Then why are we doing this?" She thought about that question. She could give him a dozen reasons. Military duty, strategic necessity, political considerations. But those were not the real reason. "Because if we don't," she said, "who will?" Dae-Hyun was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded and turned back to his work. "Then I better make sure this ship runs perfectly." In the medical bay, Dr. Yuna was organizing her supplies. She had volunteer medics from 3 different colonies, all crammed into a space meant for half their number. They were setting up extra beds, stockpiling bandages, preparing for casualties they knew would be overwhelming. A young medic, barely 18 years old, approached her nervously. "Doctor, I need to ask something." "Go ahead," Yuna said, not looking up from her inventory. "Are we really going to survive this?" Yuna stopped what she was doing. She looked at the young medic, saw the fear in his eyes, and made a choice. She could lie. Tell him everything would be fine. "But he deserved the truth." "Probably not," she said gently. "The swarm is bigger and stronger than us. We're going to lose a lot of people. Maybe all of us." The medic's face went pale. "Then why?" "Because those colonies are full of families," Yuna interrupted. "Children, old people, beings who chose to live in peace away from the wars and politics of the major powers. They don't have armies. They don't have fleets. They just have small lives they built with their own hands, and now those lives are going to end unless someone helps them. But if we all die, then we die knowing we tried," Yuna said firmly. "That matters. That means something." The fleet assembled faster than anyone expected. 20 human warships, everything they could pull together. Cruisers and destroyers, and 1 old battleship that had been scheduled for retirement. They were not impressive compared to the massive dreadnoughts of the major powers, but they were ready and they were going. Admiral Sang-Woo gave the order, and the fleet jumped to hyperspace. They arrived at the first colony, New Haven, 6 hours ahead of the swarm. Civilian ships were already trying to evacuate, but there were not enough of them. Millions still needed to get off the planet. "All ships, defensive formation," Sang-Woo ordered. "Civilian evacuation is the priority. We hold them here as long as possible." The swarm arrived right on schedule. Their ships were organic, living vessels that looked like they had been grown rather than built. They moved with insect-like coordination, perfect and terrifying. 40 hive ships against humanity's 20. The battle began. Human ships fought with everything they had. They used tactics and courage and desperate innovation. Captain Yunhai flew the indomitable spirit directly into the swarm formation, her weapons blazing. Daehyun kept the ship running even when 3 decks lost power. Yuna worked frantically in the medical bay as wounded crew members poured in. One by one, human ships fell. The destroyer Morningstar took a direct hit to its reactor. It exploded in a flash of light, taking 2 swarm ships with it. The cruiser Defiant lost half its crew but kept fighting until its hull breached. The battleship Resolute rammed a hive ship twice its size, sacrificing itself to create an opening for the evacuation transports. Admiral Sang-woo watched his fleet die. Each ship that went down was full of people he knew, friends, colleagues, young men and women who had trusted him to lead them. But the evacuation continued. Transport after transport filled with refugees and jumped to safety. Every minute the human fleet held the line was another 1,000 lives saved. After 6 hours of fighting, only 7 human ships remained. They were damaged, barely functional, running on emergency power. The swarm had lost 15 ships, but they had plenty more. Sang-woo knew it was over. They had done everything they could. They had bought time for most of the civilians to escape. But now there was nothing left. He activated the emergency broadcast, sending a message on all frequencies that anyone in the galaxy could receive. "This is Admiral Sang-woo of the human fleet," he said, his voice calm despite everything. "To anyone listening, the colonies are evacuating. We have held them here as long as we can. We ask that you remember what happened here today. Remember that we tried. Remember that civilians needed help and we came." He paused, looking at the tactical display. The swarm was closing in for the final attack. "We are humanity," he continued. "We believe that every life has value, that protecting the innocent is worth any cost, that doing the right thing matters more than survival. We came here because these people needed us. We die here because we would not abandon them. Hold the galaxy accountable. Make them remember." He closed the channel and looked at what was left of his fleet. 7 ships, hundreds of crew members, all of them about to die. "All ships," he said quietly. "It has been an honor serving with you. Humanity will remember your names." Captain Yunhai sat on the bridge of the indomitable spirit, her ship shaking as swarm weapons tore through its hull. She thought about her family back on Earth, about her daughter who was learning to play the piano, about her husband who made terrible jokes at breakfast. She would never see them again. But behind her, on scanners, she could see the last evacuation transports jumping to safety. Families who would live, children who would grow up, all because humanity had stood between them and death. "Worth it," she whispered. The swarm ships moved in for the kill. And across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the human fleet's last stand, broadcast live on every channel. They watched as 7 ships faced impossible odds. Velthar could not watch anymore. He stood in his quarters staring at the screen showing the human fleet's final moments, and something inside him broke. All his life he had been taught that the Varanthi were superior, that they were strong because they did not waste resources on weaker species. That compassion was weakness and mercy was foolishness, but what was he watching now? Strength? Was it strength to sit safely at home while others died? Was it power to debate in comfortable chambers while civilians burned? The humans were dying, really dying. And for what? For people they did not know. For colonies that had no connection to Earth. For the simple reason that someone had to help. Velthar made a decision that would change his life forever. He ran from his quarters through the crystal corridors of the military complex. Guards called after him, but he ignored them. He burst through the doors of the War Council chambers, where the highest commanders of the Varanthi Empire were still debating their response to the swarm. "They are dying," Velthar shouted. Every head turned to stare at him. In Varanthi culture, interrupting the War Council was a serious offense. He could be imprisoned for this. He did not care. Commander Rathzal stood up, his forearms gesturing sharply. "Soldier, you will leave immediately or—" "They saved my life," Velthar interrupted. He was shaking now, adrenaline and emotion making his voice crack. 6 months ago, a human crew found me dying in a wrecked ship. They used their medical supplies on me, supplies they needed. They shared their food and water. They risked their journey to save 3 Varanthi, who had never shown them anything but contempt. "We know this story," one of the council members said dismissively. "It changes nothing. It changes everything. Velthar moved closer, staring at Rathzal. Commander, you remember the Krell plague? 20,000 Varanthi died. But it would have been millions without human medicine. They gave it freely. And during the station collapse at Tier 7, 200 of our civilians saved by human ships. One of those ships was destroyed in the rescue. 26 humans died saving our people. The council was silent now, listening despite themselves. And now, Velthar continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. Now they are dying for colonies that are not even their own, while we sit here, comfortable and safe, debating protocols. What are we if we let this happen? What does it say about us if we watch them die alone? Rathazal stared at him. The old commander's expression was unreadable. Then slowly he turned to look at the screen showing the battle. 7 human ships surrounded by swarm vessels fighting to the last. The boy is right, Rathzal said quietly. The council members stirred. Commander, you cannot be serious. I am completely serious, Rathzal said, his voice getting stronger. For decades, humanity has helped us. Small things mostly. Easy to ignore. Easy to dismiss as anomalies. But they add up, don't they? All those little kindnesses. All those moments when they did the right thing instead of the profitable thing. He stood up, his full height imposing. And we took it all. We took their help and gave nothing back. We called them primitive while they acted with more honor than we have shown in centuries. And now they are dying and we are going to sit here and do nothing? But the strategic implications, another council member began. Damn the strategic implications. Rathzal roared. What is strategy worth if we have no honor? What is power worth if we are cowards? The humans are fighting a battle they cannot win for people they do not know. And we who claim to be superior are afraid to join them. He turned to the military aide. Activate the First Fleet, all ships. We are going to New Haven. Commander, that is not your decision alone. Then stop me, Rathzal said coldly. Court-martial me. Imprison me. But do it after I save the humans who once saved us. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out. On Nishal Prime, Dr. Ela stood before the Science Assembly. She had called an emergency meeting, interrupting research projects and academic conferences. Now she faced hundreds of her peers, all confused about why she had summoned them. I am here to talk about humanity, she said without preamble. How many of you have worked with human scientists? About a third of the appendages in the room raised. Ela nodded. And how many of those projects resulted in the humans taking full credit? Taking advantage of our work? Stealing our research? No appendages raised. The assembly was quiet. That is what I thought, Ela said. In the 30 years since humanity joined the galactic scientific community, they have been part of 642 joint research projects. In every single case, they insisted on shared credit. In 78 cases, they gave us more credit than they took for themselves. She pulled up data on the main screen, graphs and charts showing decades of collaboration. They share data freely. They help with experiments without demanding authorship. They celebrate our discoveries like they are their own. And right now, while they die trying to save civilians, we sit in our laboratories doing nothing. Dr. Ela, what exactly are you proposing? The assembly moderator asked. I am proposing that we remember what science is supposed to be about, Ela said. The search for truth. The advancement of knowledge. The betterment of all life. The humans live these ideals, do we? She looked around the chamber. I am taking my research vessel to New Haven. Anyone who wants to join me is welcome. Anyone who wants to stay can explain to history why they did nothing. Half the assembly stood up. On the trading station Kresh 9, Colvin the Dray merchant was watching the same broadcast. Around him, hundreds of other merchants and traders from a dozen species were gathered, all staring at the screens in horrified silence. 3 years ago, Colvin said, his voice carrying through the crowd, I was attacked by pirates. My ships were about to be destroyed. A human patrol came. 1 ship against 5. They saved us and lost their ship doing it. He looked around at the other merchants. How many of you have similar stories? How many times have humans helped you and asked for nothing? Hands and appendages and tentacles raised all around the station. Dozens of them. I have a proposal, Colvin said. We are merchants. We are not warriors. But we have ships. Fast ships. Ships that can carry supplies and evacuees. Ships that can help. The swarm will destroy us, someone protested. Maybe, Colvin agreed. But I watched a human captain die to save me. I will not watch humans die again while I do nothing. I am going to New Haven. Who is with me? The response was overwhelming. Merchant ships began powering up their engines. Traders who had never worked together in their lives started coordinating. A ragtag fleet began to assemble. On New Sanctuary, the refugee world, Pyrrha stood in the central square with thousands of other Quellan. Her adoptive parents, Donghyun and Sujin, stood beside her. They were watching the broadcast on a massive public screen. Pyrrha felt tears running down her face, her skin shifting to the deep blue that meant profound sadness in her culture. They are like you, she said to her parents. They see people who need help and they just go. They do not think about the cost. Sujin hugged her daughter close. That is who we are, who we try to be. Then we have to help them, Pyrrha said. The humans saved my people. They gave us this world. We cannot let them die. Donghyun looked at his wife. Some unspoken communication passed between them. Then he nodded and pulled out his communication device. I am calling the governor. We have ships. Not many, but some. And we have people who remember what it means to be saved. All across the galaxy, ordinary beings made extraordinary decisions. Not governments. Not military powers. Just people who remembered kindness and could not bear to see it punished. Within 2 hours of Admiral Sangwoo's final broadcast, 300 ships were moving toward New Haven. Within 4 hours, 1,000. The Varanthi First Fleet, massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapons, Nishal research vessels retrofitted with whatever weapons they could mount, merchant ships from a dozen species, refugee transports carrying volunteers who had no training but came anyway. It was chaos. There was no unified command, no single strategy. Species that had never coordinated before tried to work together. But they came. They all came, and they kept coming. On the bridge of the Indomitable Spirit, Captain Eunhai was preparing for the end. Her ship was barely functional. Life support was failing. Weapons were offline. The swarm ships were closing in for the final attack. Then her sensor officer, who had been wounded but refused to leave her post, made a sound. A strange choked laugh. Captain, she said, you need to see this. Eunhai looked at the tactical display. For a moment, she did not understand what she was seeing. Then she did, and she had to grip her chair to stay standing. Ships, hundreds of them, dropping out of hyperspace in waves. Ships she recognized and ships she had never seen before. Warships and cargo vessels and science ships and transports. All converging on New Haven. Who? She started to say, but her voice would not work. Her communications officer found his voice first. Ma'am, we are receiving hails. Dozens of them. The Varanthi fleet is here. The Nishal. The Dray Merchant Guild. Independent ships from across the galaxy. They are all here. Why? Eunhai whispered. The answer came in a transmission from Commander Rathzal himself. His face appeared on screen, stern and proud. Captain Eunhai of the Indomitable Spirit. 3 weeks after the Battle of New Haven, the Galactic Council convened for an emergency session. Every major power was present, along with representatives from dozens of minor species. The chamber was packed beyond capacity. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. The session was supposed to address the swarm threat and coordinate defensive strategies. But everyone knew what it was really about. It was about humanity and what the galaxy owed them. The human ambassador, Wanshik, sat quietly in the human delegation section. He was an older man, gray-haired and patient. He had been humanity's voice in the galaxy for 15 years. In that time, he had endured countless insults and dismissals. He had watched his people be blocked from trade routes and denied memberships in important councils. He had represented a species that most of the galaxy saw as insignificant. Now the entire galaxy was watching him. The Varanthi ambassador spoke first. He was a different person than the one who had argued against helping the colonies. That ambassador had resigned in shame. This new representative was younger, and his 3 eyes looked directly at Wanshik as he spoke. The Varanthi Empire wishes to formally acknowledge a debt, he said. For decades, humanity has offered assistance to our people. Medical aid during the Krell Plague, rescue operations during disasters, small kindnesses that we dismissed or ignored. We took these gifts without gratitude. We called humanity primitive while they demonstrated honor we had forgotten. The chamber was silent. The Varanthi did not apologize easily or often. At New Haven, humanity was prepared to die for beings who were not their own. The ambassador continued. They held the line while we debated. They sacrificed while we calculated. This shames us. This shames every species that did nothing. He paused, then said something that made the entire chamber gasp. The Varanthi Empire proposes that humanity be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights and privileges. Further, we propose a formal alliance between our peoples as equals. The word equals echoed through the chamber. The proud Varanthi, calling humans their equals. It was unprecedented. Other ambassadors stood to speak. The Nishal, the Dre, the Quellan, even species that had never interacted with humanity before. One by one, they told their stories. They spoke of human scientists who shared knowledge freely, human merchants who dealt fairly, human families who adopted orphans from a dozen different species. We thought compassion was weakness, the Nishal ambassador said. Humanity taught us it is strength, the strongest thing in the galaxy, perhaps. We thought charity was foolishness, the Dre representative added. But foolishness does not inspire 1,000 ships to risk death. Foolishness does not change the galaxy. The pattern became clear. Species after species stood up to support humanity, to offer alliances and trade agreements and friendship. The chamber filled with voices all saying the same thing in different ways. Humanity had earned their respect, their admiration, their gratitude. Through it all, Ambassador Wanshik sat quietly listening. His hands were folded in his lap, his expression calm. But inside his heart was pounding. Finally, the council moderator called for order. The council recognizes the human ambassador. Please speak, Wanshik stood slowly. He walked to the central platform where all could see him. For a moment, he just looked around the chamber at hundreds of alien faces all watching him, waiting to hear what humanity would demand for their sacrifice. Thank you, he said simply. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the chamber. Thank you for coming to our aid. Thank you for the offers of alliance and friendship. Thank you for recognizing what we tried to do at New Haven. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Many of you expect me to make demands now, to leverage this moment for political gain or territorial expansion or economic advantage. That is what any rational species would do. That is what you would do in our position. Wanshik smiled slightly. But if you expected that, you do not understand us yet. We did not go to New Haven for gratitude or payment. We went because people needed help and we could give it. We would do it again tomorrow, even if you offered us nothing. Because that is who we are. The chamber stirred. This was not what they expected. Humanity does not want to be repaid, Wanshik continued. We do not believe in keeping score of kindnesses. We help because it needs to be done, not because we expect something in return. That is what real compassion means, doing what is right without expecting reward. He looked around the chamber again. But I will ask something of you. Not payment, not political favors. Just this, remember. Remember that we are stronger together than divided. Remember that mercy is not weakness and compassion is not foolishness. Remember that every species in this chamber has value and every life matters. Wanshik's voice grew stronger. For too long, the galaxy has been divided. Powers compete against each other. The strong ignore the weak. We hoard knowledge and resources. We debate while people suffer. We calculate advantage while others die. And where has that gotten us? The swarm grows stronger. Poverty spreads. Wars continue. We have the technology and resources to make the galaxy better, but we waste them on competition and mistrust. He gestured to the chamber. You came together at New Haven, dozens of species that had never coordinated before. You put aside your differences and your calculations and you came, and together you stopped the swarm. Together you saved millions of lives. Imagine what we could do if we did that every day. Imagine the galaxy we could build. Wanshik's eyes were bright now, passionate. So here is what I ask. Not for humanity, but for all of us. Let New Haven be the beginning, not the end. Build a galaxy where species help each other not because of treaties or debts, but because it is right. Where the strong protect the weak. Where knowledge is shared freely. Where compassion is valued as much as power. He looked directly at the Varanthi ambassador. You called us primitive once. Maybe you were right. But if being civilized means calculating the value of every kindness, if advancement means forgetting how to care, then perhaps primitive is better. Perhaps the galaxy needs more primitives, Wanshik smiled. We do not need you to repay us. We just ask that you remember this moment. Remember that doing the right thing matters. And maybe, next time someone needs help, you will not need humans to show you the way. You will go on your own. He bowed slightly. That is all humanity asks. Thank you. Wunschik returned to his seat. The chamber was absolutely silent. Then, slowly, the Varanthi ambassador stood. He made a gesture with his forearms that in his culture meant profound respect, a gesture usually reserved for war heroes and honored dead. Other ambassadors began standing. One by one, then in groups, then all at once. The entire Galactic Council rose to their feet. Some made gestures of respect. Some remained silent. But they all stood. It was not applause. It was something deeper. Acknowledgement. Recognition. A moment when the galaxy collectively understood something it had forgotten. Later, after the formal session ended, Velthar found Ambassador Wunschik in a quiet corridor. The young Varanthi was now wearing an honor guard uniform, a position of high respect in his culture. He had been given the role specifically for his part in organizing the response to New Haven. "Ambassador," Velthar said, stopping him. "May I speak with you?" Wunschik turned and smiled. "Of course, and please call me Wunschik." "I wanted to thank you," Velthar said, "for what Commander Taejun did, for saving my life. I never properly expressed my gratitude." "You expressed it by coming to our aid," Wunschik said. "That was thanks enough. But I must know," Velthar said. How does your species do this? How do you help without expecting anything? How do you give without counting the cost? We have been trying to understand for months. It makes no strategic sense." Wunschik thought about that question. "Do you know Earth's history?" he asked. Velthar nodded. "Some. Your people nearly destroyed themselves several times, wars, environmental disasters. You came very close to extinction." "We did," Wunschik agreed. "And we survived because we learned something important. We learned that we needed each other. That the strong helping the weak made everyone stronger. That compassion was not just moral but practical. When we finally reached the stars, we brought that lesson with us." He smiled. "But there is another reason. We remember what it was like to be alone. When we first developed warp drive and entered the galaxy, we were terrified. We knew we were behind technologically. We knew larger powers could crush us. We felt small and vulnerable. And yet no one helped you," Velthar said quietly. "No," Wunschik agreed. "We were on our own. We had to struggle for every advance, every territory, every bit of respect. And we decided that when we saw others in that position, others who were alone and scared and vulnerable, we would not ignore them the way we were ignored. We would be the help we wished we had received." Velthar was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are teaching us, teaching all of us, how to be better." "We are just being who we are," Wunschik said. "But if that helps others find their own compassion, then perhaps that is the greatest gift we can give." 5 years passed. The galaxy changed. The alliance formed after New Haven grew into something unprecedented.